Hello everyone, it's Wayne Jones, the course coordinator for the subject Employment Law in Australia here at Central Queensland University. This is week 1, which is an introductory week. So a little bit about what we'll talk about this week before we start. Can I start by mentioning that this is very much a course about the relationship between the employer and the employee. We're going to talk about that employment contract, what sorts of things regulate it beyond what the parties might agree between themselves, and where you go to when you've got problems. So to that extent, we won't really be talking about issues, broader issues such as, well, for example, taxation. We won't talk about the workplace health and safety regime, except to identify that it does exist and talk a little bit about the obligations. And we won't be talking about topics such as the work cover regime, which of course ensures workers who are injured during the course of their employment. So we just talk very much about the employment relationship. We'll be together for 12 weeks. So this first week, just by way of setting a little bit of background, we'll talk about these topics. We're going to think about the sources of employment law in Australia. Where does employment law come from? We'll talk about, of course, the biggest piece of legislation we need to refer to at a national level, and that's the Fair Work Act. But also we'll think about what other sorts of regulations, what other sources of employment law it might be necessary for you to look at if you're working out a problem for a client. We need to think about the constitutional basis for employment law, simply because until very recently so much of the law in this area came from the state, and now that's changed dramatically, and probably most of the law comes from the Commonwealth, from the federal government. I think we need to at least have a discussion about why it is that employment law has moved away from the occupation or occupational awards. Most of you would have heard of awards to enterprise agreements. Why did that happen? What was the impetus for that? And then to finish off, we're going to think about which regulatory bodies are out there that you might need to call on for assistance if you do have an employment law problem, and what are some of the sources of employment law that you can go to if you're undertaking research in this area. So a little bit to cover by way of introduction, but I think worth having the discussion about those topics. So please join me with the lecture. Join me in the lecture, which is going to be available here in the week 1 material shortly. I hope you enjoy employment law in Australia, and I look forward to working with you over the next 12 weeks. Thanks.